Now, very few boards command such the attention of the Maximus Hero does. Only a handful of them really embody the full potential of both a CPU and the motherboard into a single product. And the Maximus Hero is ASUS occasion to show off its best possible engineering at still an obtainable price tag, if that makes any sense. And today we are reviewing its latest iteration, the ROG MAXIMUS XII HERO from ASUS. The undisputed king of players, an enthusiast workhorse, the good-looking amongst the good-looking. And why don't I get such an introduction? Imagine me walking in a room packed and hearing somebody saying, "Here's the king of players, good-looking over the good-looking." Why? 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 Don't answer that. So the Hero is the Maximus entry level, like I said earlier, granting, enthusiast-driven and focused features at yet an obtainable price, per se. In short, this is where all eyes fall every year, probably because it is the most purchased enthusiast motherboard in the Intel realm, period. If this motherboard goes well, the entire ASUS lineup goes well. Now, I feel the pressure yet, but more importantly, as in all Z490 powered motherboard, Intel is playing catch up with AMD, both on the processor core count and the PCIe standard. And it shows because Z490 powered motherboards are much closer to their AMD X570 counterpart in terms of VRM and manufacture, which is a very good thing. Now, starting with the obvious. We are dealing with a 6 PCB layered ATX motherboard, and right there, having 6 layers means a perfect PCIe 4.0 support, stronger signal isolation, a better VRM heat dissipation. Fundamental one checked. CPU socket wise, we have an upgraded LGA 1200 CPU socket supporting both PCIe 3 10th and PCIe 4 11th generation of Intel Core CPU. Important distinction because this is where our PCIe 4.0 components will draw their bandwidth from. And as a reminder, PCIe 4.0 is very important since it doubles the available bandwidth to the components who can operate with this standard. VRM wise, well, it is very different from its predecessor, but almost identical to its X570 AMD version. We have 1660 amps power stages controlled by a couple of ASP1405 controllers, organizing them in 8 parallel phases, 7 of which are CPU dedicated. That is 840 amps of CPU-centric power, more than you'll ever need to properly run an excessively overclock a 10-core processor, and so much so that it actually hints at a much stronger or higher core count 11th generation of Intel Core processor. But obviously that much power means a lot of heat. Luckily, we have a few things working in our favor. First, having that many power stages spreads the loads and heat over a wider surface, so that's obviously good. We also have the 6 PCB layers, which does a great job at dissipating a lot of that VRM heat. And most importantly, we have this massive, and I mean massive, C-shaped 3 stages copper pipe connected heatsink, which does an amazing job at conducting and radiating away all that excess heat. I also want to note that double contact design, which gives dedicated thermopadded contact to both power stages and MOSFETs. It is obviously such an upgrade when compared to its predecessor. It is bigger, thicker, and wider than anything I have seen before, and really adds to the overclocking potential of our board. So in terms of fundamentals, the Hero comes out brilliantly. Whatever ASUS needed to do to make this board an enthusiast must, it's done so. So a gigantic engineering kudos to ASUS for this. Memory wise, the Hero can support up to 128GB of DDR4 RAM in a dual channel configuration, overclockable, up to 4.8 GHz, 400 MHz more than its predecessor, but in par with its X570 version. And I don't expect everyone to go at 4.8 GHz, but I'll mention the Optimum 3 memory management system of ASUS, which does a rather good job at getting us and keeping us at higher clocks like 4 and 4.2 gigahertz for select RAM models, and that's going to be very important in immediate performance gain, especially for memory intensive tasks. So a big kudos memory wise to ASUS for this. Staying in the memory, we have 3 M.2 solid state drive which can swap data up to 32 gigabit per second each, but couple it with the 11th generation core processor and the CPU fed ones should see PCIe 4.0 level transfers, meaning up to a whopping 64 gigabit per second. But I can already hear you say, "Oh Laurent, how do you know this? It's not in the documentation, is it?" See this little thing right here? That's a Gen 4 clock generator, which will be able to safely convert PCIe signals and feed our M.2 solid state drive with PCIe 4.0 level bandwidth yumminess. In both cases, our stick will go hot really fast, and that's precisely why we got this large, thick, big thermo-padded heat shield, which will do the job at keeping them cool at all time. Now, a little critic. You need to remove the plastic chipset cover in order to access the dual M.2 solid state drive plate screws, which is not the best design in my opinion. Nothing big, but worth noting. Export-wise, we have 6 PCIe exports, 3 bachelors and 3 16 slots with different speeds. As usual, only the closest one to your CPU can deliver up to 16 full bus speed, meaning this is where you'd want your video card to be placed for optimal performances. In a dual GPU configuration, our slots will be sharing bandwidth in an 8x8 configuration. So a great board for single or dual GPU configuration, hence the metallic reinforcements. Now again, keep in mind that as soon as you'll upgrade your processor to 11th generation Intel processor, hence a PCIe 4.0 processor, those 2 slots will be PCIe 4.0 compliant as well, doubling their bandwidth from 1 gigabyte per second to 2 gigabyte per second per channel. Now it's important to note, even though current video cards do not use PCIe 4.0 bandwidth level just yet. Now taking a quick look at our Z490 chipset. Well, there's really not much there but a renamed V390 chipset with a few more IOs, and that explains the cool 6 watt heat footprint, which does bring the advantage of avoiding a more expensive and noisy fan to keep it cool, as seen on the X570 powered motherboard. Back IO wise, well, first let me note the presence of a padded back IO plate, which was expected, but I also want to mention the fact that ASUS changed their assembling method for a more permanent and solid approach, which I kind of like. Now, starting from the left, we have our clear CMOS BIOS button, meaning that you can upgrade and recover your BIOS without the need of a processor, which is important knowing that you will need a BIOS update to run 11th generation of Intel processors. Next, we have 2 second generation USB plugs, an HDMI 1.4b output, which is wrong in so many different ways. First, with such a powerful VRM, the only thing who stands in the way of extreme overclocking is the fact that we have an integrated output, because this is the very first thing will fry if you push your VRM too high. So that's something who might potentially slow down your overclocking, and I'm not very happy about that. Secondly, it's a 1.4b standard, meaning 4K at 24 frames per second, and knowing that the 11th generation of Intel Core processor will come with the next generation of Xe integrated Intel APU, it's kind of ridiculous because they will be running at much higher frequency. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, it is a nuisance, and for next time, ASUS should do a favor for themselves and us by removing integrated graphics on this series and save everybody a couple of bucks. Next, we have 4 5 gigabit USB plugs, 4 10 gigabit USB plugs including a Type-C, a 1 gigabit LAN, as well as a 5 gigabit Aquantia plug, which is a lot of bandwidth. And usually I'm not such a big fan of dual LAN plugs, but in the context of the Hero and the fact that a lot of gamers and gamers will be using this platform, it kind of makes sense, because if you're using a dedicated streaming server, having the 5 gigabit per second Aquantia really turns this whole thing around, because it'll be fast enough to sustain such a streaming server. So yeah, big kudos to ASUS for thinking of that. Next, we have a Wi-Fi 6 AX200 with a transfer rate up to 2.4 gigabit per second, same that is available on the AMD X570 series, and again, a good example on Intel trying to catch up on AMD. And finally, we have a premium S1220 Realtek audio codec, which fully benefits from the 6-layer PCB configuration, since both left and right audio channel have been traced on individual and dedicated PCB layers, providing a better static isolation, especially when recording. So big kudos to ASUS for this. So overall, and despite the HDMI fluke, this is a very well furnished back I/O. I mean, we have almost up to 70 gigabit per second worth of bandwidth there, which is mind-boggling. But most importantly, having the dual LAN configuration is really a good touch, a nice touch for enthusiast streamers out there. So yeah, another big kudos to ASUS for this. Now, front panel connector wise, we have 2 second generation plugs, great to monitor PSU and all-in-one water coolers, a 5 gigabit front panel connector, and a 10 gigabit Type-C front panel connector. Always happy to find that one on board. And let's not forget our Thunderbolt 3, which will provide multiple monitor support and transfers up to a whopping 40 gigabit per second. Cooling wise, well, as expected, we do have a bunch of stuff, starting with 8 PWM fans, 2 of which can support D5 water pumps. Now, obviously, this is what you expect from an enthusiast motherboard, which will not only provide a solid airflow, but also support the most eccentric dual loop custom water configuration, such as the few ones I have behind me. But I still have a little critic, because I still want ASUS to evolve to hybrid fan connectors as introduced by Gigabyte last year, which would have given a complete different level of enthusiast agility to the board. So not a huge concern about this, but something that I'd like ASUS to take in consideration for the next iteration of this motherboard. Troubleshooting wise, I'll start with a soldered button. We have a start, reset, and retry soldered button, definitely making things easier for builders out there. Now, little note, the reset button is called Flex because you will be able to customize what it does in the BIOS. For example, putting on and off your RGB instead of a reset. So it's first time I see it, and I commend ASUS for thinking of something as cool as that. Now, in case of problem, we have an easy debugger to guide us through the booting sequence, but most importantly, we have our QLED screen, which refines our troubleshooting with Q error codes, exactly what I expected to see in a ROG series. Most importantly, what you really need to have when you're looking at high core count processor and possibly a PCIe 4.0 enabled motherboard. So yeah, kudos to ASUS for the complete set of ROG troubleshooting features. Finally, this would not be a ROG motherboard without the rejuvenating glory of RGB galore, which is present on this motherboard, starting with an RGB strip hidden under our chipset cover, a rather dim RGB screen spelling Hero under our I/O roof, and if it's not enough, we have 4 RGB connectors, 2 of which are addressable, placed in pair and at opposite sides of the board for easy access. In short, if you ever wanted to open an exotic dancing bar, this motherboard will take care of the lighting for you. Now, in conclusion, the ROG Maximus XII Hero will cost you about $400 before taxes, which is about $50 more than what the Maximus XI Hero did cost at launch. And I'll start by saying that compared to its predecessor, the Maximus XII Hero is a major evolution. That is a big leap forward. We got these durable 6-layer PCBs, this extremely powerful and cool VRM, premium IOs, and a very well-featured troubleshooting tools. I also want to mention an unprecedented care for details and an upgraded assembling, which really shows at entry level from heatsinks to back IO plate. And so not only will it squeeze out every drop of performance out of your processor and all the components, but it will do so safely. Actually, I want to say this Hero is so good that I'm not sure it's even worth buying the Maximus 12 Formula or even the Extreme, because there's really not much they can add on to what we have right here. But now there's another important question. If you are already rocking and operating a Z390/9th generation Intel processor? Is it worth upgrading motherboard and processors? And the short answer is, right now, no. Despite being a beautiful board, it still and remains a PCIe 3.0 standard board, and it will not change until a September release of the 11th generation of Intel Core processor, which will enable double the bandwidth and the PCIe 4.0 level bandwidth. So until then, I can see a reasonable argument at staying with your Z390/9th generation Intel Core processor, at least for now. But if that's not your case, and you got either an older build or even no build at all, the ROG MAXIMUS XII HERO is about the best manufactured enthusiast board I have seen at that price range. It really takes it to another level. And if you're on the market for the best possible enthusiast/user-centric motherboard, well, there's really nowhere else your money needs to be.